Hey there, my name's Nickle, and tonight I'll be presenting to you my debut onto the internet, talking about video games and movies I liked, didn't like, or just want to share. Starting us off on this journey, I'd like to talk about a great game that came out back in 2020. It had some issues when it released and even fell under brief fire for the graphic nature of its content. But despite all that, this game and its developer have been trucking along for the past 2 years, updating and improving the game and building what is now a great monument to what games once were, and kind of giving me hope for the industry. And now, our feature presentation, The Citadel. The Citadel is an indie, old-school 90s retro FPS game that was released to Steam on August 5th, 2020. No, not like those. The Citadel isn't just some half-baked cash-grab craze follower made on a Chinese rip-off of the Wolfenstein engine. The Citadel is more like the modern classic shooters, but it's in the style of a retro shooter. Hi there, Future Nickle here, just going back through on editing, and I realized that I make this statement and then never come back to it or corroborate it in any way later on, so let me give you a few examples of what I mean, because otherwise it could give you some false expectations. So here in some of these rather choice trailers of what I would consider to be the best examples of reborn boomer shooters, we have a lot of really slick, fast-paced movement. I mean, a general good rule of thumb widely remembered by anyone who played Doom 2016 is that don't stop moving. If you do, that's death. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get to here, because aesthetically the Citadel does look very much like a classic retro boomer shooter, but in gameplay is where you see the more modern aesthetics of it. Alright, thank you for your time. It features a vast arsenal of deadly implements and a varied and dangerous army to fight against. 7 unique bosses, 3 dimensions of movement, bullet time, semi-destructible environments, and much more. What really brings it together, though, is that the Citadel is the labor of love of one man, created to pay homage to both the classic shooters of Japan and the West. However, more than just doom cloning to hell, out of an already overly saturated genre, the developer also expanded on what a first-person shooter is, creating a truly unique experience for the player. Now, some of you may be hung up on my differentiation of retro shooters in Japan and the West, and wondering either, aren't they the same no matter where you are, or maybe, does Japan have their own version of Doom released around the same time? And I'm sure there's that one guy who's thinking, finally, somebody who knows about the hit Japanese classic, Sonotoki Watashi wa Jikoku no Hakobari Kase Nimaru Mai no... I don't speak very good Japanese. I think I'm just gonna keep all the takes in. Sonotoki Watashi wa Jikoku ni Hakobari Kase Nimaru Mai ni Subute no Akuma o Kiroshimashita. 2 tries. Nice. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint all of you, but none of that was quite what I meant. See, in researching the Citadel for this video, an endeavor in and of itself, as such research material is rather lacking, I learned that in Japan, classic FPS usually refers to games that we older Zoomers here in the West may be a bit more familiar with. Games such as Halo, GoldenEye, Modern Warfare, the good one, and other games of that type. As I'm sure you can imagine, such a combination sounds challenging to say the least. However, the Citadel's developer, Dokuramore, pulled it off with unimaginable grace and skill. Seriously, I want whatever this man was smoking to get the game made like it is. Combat in the Citadel seems to present an excellent mix of the combat formulas the game was influenced by. It can be fast-paced or slow and meticulous. You can run and gun, sequence breaking, and speedrunning your way to the end of each level, or you can carefully creep through each map, killing every hostile you find and searching for secrets. The design of the Citadel really leaves a lot of room for every kind of player. Except, of course. Music in media, and especially in video games, is an often overlooked but very important aspect of gameplay. Now, on a surface level, it does help set the mood and tension for events and environment, as well as the game in general. Triumphant music shouldn't play over a tragedy, combat tracks shouldn't play during stealth sections, unless you suck at stealth, and so on and so forth. But there's a lot more to it than just does it fit, that goes into music and soundtrack for video games. In many development studios, music is designed in a way that can subconsciously help to engage the player. It needs to be active enough to help keep the player engaged and, invested in the game, but not so active, or at the very least not active in an intrusive way so that it distracts the player from the gameplay. The soundtrack of the Citadel, for the most part, does a really good job at this. Its music typically falls into one of three categories: tension, melancholic, and anime opening. Hub areas and boss fights typically have a very somber music that, when paired with the game's setting, almost make it feel like a calmer moment in a Souls game. To contrast, during normal gameplay in more combat-focused levels, you get this really intense music reminiscent of FPS remakes or the original Quake games. Really encouraging an aggressive playstyle. Finally, we come to the levels where the game fights dirty. You get these vast levels of winding, interconnected corridors, tight hallways, cramped arenas, and false walls hiding anything from a handful of slimes to a tank. These more trap-heavy levels feature a more tense soundtrack, building a sense of unease in the player as they creep through the game. Now, all this sounds very nice, however there is a minor downside. Remember earlier I mentioned the game accommodated a wide variety of playstyles? Now that's a wonderful thing in games, and when paired with a double or triple A developer, you can program the soundtrack to adapt to how the player interfaces with the game. However, being that the Citadel only had a single developer, that means that on certain levels, the soundtrack will feel out of place with your actions as the player. Now that being said, that's a downside brought on by the availability of player freedom, which is a very big plus for a video game. So, if that is an issue for you, you could always just go into the options and turn the music off. Now, in the Citadel, there's a lot of different enemies, but audio-wise, they all function a little bit differently. Of the 14 different types of enemies, there are really only 6 or 7 different weapon sounds. But that's because the enemies only really have about 6 or 7 types of attacks, meaning you're still roughly able to identify the threat and respond appropriately, even if you aren't able to see the enemy. I would also say another 6 of the enemies, which would be a different 6, or a different set of 6 that is, have distinct sounds when moving, so the player can use that as a way to maintain a form of situational awareness. However, because these things aren't implemented across the board, you aren't really able to rely on that. Hi there, future Nickle here again. Something I do neglect to really focus or bring up on in this video is just how much of a negative impact this kind of has on the game. I never found it to cause me any actual issues, but I would definitely say it's one of the weaker aspects of the game is that it has a lot of these ideas that are really good, they're really diegetic, and they would work incredibly well in any game if implemented 100% with totality. the Citadel has a lot of these kind of half-done ideas. For example, Emo General Grievous, who you'll be introduced to later, is like the only enemy with an alert sound. Every other enemy, the alert sound is being shot at. Some enemies have footsteps, some enemies don't. Some enemies use the exact same attack, some enemies don't. That sort of thing. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff where it's just a half-completed idea. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up now. Now then, back to the video. You see, in most classic FPS games, the enemies will have things like an alert sound, a little noise to let you know that they can see you. This is so common that in some games it was actually used as a way to disadvantage the player in order to add an extra layer of challenge. In the Citadel, the alert sound is gunfire. However, this is often offset by the fact that, well, no, this isn't often offset. This is offset by the fact that there are no hit scan weapons in the game. Meaning, theoretically, even if an enemy gets the drop on you, you could, technically speaking, get out of the way. Now, depending on how close they are to you, that bullet may not have to travel very far to, hit you, but the possibility is there. I would definitely say enemy audio is one of the weaker aspects of the Citadel. However, what we have is serviceable enough. There were only a few times in my playthroughs of the game where enemies were actually able to sneak up on me, and there wasn't a single time in which I died to an enemy that had crept up behind. Overall, while it is weak, it doesn't detract from overall gameplay or make life significantly difficult for players, and the absence of hit scanners helps greatly in balancing the lack of enemy alert sounds. As for player soundscape, we have a much stronger showing from the game. Footsteps are audible throughout the game, matching movement speed and type. Your footsteps are quieter and have a kind of rustling sound when crouch walking. Each weapon type in your arsenal makes a distinct sound when fired and reloaded, often specific to whatever type of weapon it is. Empty shells can be heard hitting the ground while firing. And empty magazines can be heard clattering to the floor after they've been expended. You get some basic sounds for item pickups, different depending on the item type, ammo, consumables, armor, boosters, etc. And using consumables also plays a different sound depending on the type of consumable. Now, I'm sure this all sounds pretty standard to you, and maybe it seems like I'm really sucking this game's dick for the littlest of things. For me, this is where the context of the game comes in, though. This is an indie game on Steam that was designed by one man. A single guy had to program and make all of this run, and if you have any degree of experience with indie games on Steam, you know how common it is for these lone wolf type of devs to just kind of phone it in for an easy 25-cent paycheck. Part of what makes the Citadel so good is the fact that if you kept only the gameplay and mechanics and made everything else Unity asset flips and dead silence or poorly placed royalty-free music, it would still stand as a good game. All these points of praise weren't required of the dev. He could have half-assed everything other than gameplay and would have still blown all the other indie FPS games out of the water. Instead, he went the extra mile and put in the work to make the game the best he could. Hell, it's still being updated and optimized to this day, a labor unnecessary of the developer. Art direction in the Citadel is the most standout design aspect. Fairly unique to the genre, it serves an excellent job of catching your eye and separating it from its peers. The laziest way to describe it would be to call it anime style. And while that is true, it's a bit like saying every American cartoon is Tex Avery style. Technically true, but it strips it of nuance. The Citadel has a kind of grimdark sci-fi aesthetic to it. Rooms will have wall textures that kind of make me think of a cathedral, but with cables and wires running all through it. I really liked the more transhumanist design theme in the enemies as well. I felt like it was very consistent with the world we were being portrayed, and did a decent job of communicating to the player what kind of a game world they were in without pulling them out of gameplay for exposition. Of course, though, that could be a matter of, me just getting out what I was willing to put into the game. I understand a lot of reviewers felt lost as far as the plot. Enemies, I found, were artistically well made, colored, and shaped distinctly enough for the player to be able to tell them apart from each other and the environment. The only exception there being the slimes. However, you typically hear them before you're even in the same room as them, and they're hardly a threat, so it never caused me any issues. Now, the criticism has been raised that the levels and rooms are very samey in appearance, and that it can be hard to tell rooms apart, causing navigation issues in the more mazy areas. While I understand that complaint, it's kind of hard for me to take it seriously, as if you're willing to be, genuine with that criticism, then you would have to apply that across the boards to most FPS games as a whole. Quake, Doom, Wolfenstein come primarily to mind, and one can justify it to a greater degree even with later entries to the genre. Minor as it is, I find it to be an unfair critique of the game. That being said, the lack of variety in environment aesthetics can make it difficult to tell what walls and environment pieces can be interacted with. This can, though, be easily overcome by checking your map. I mean, really, what's the complaint here? The game designed by one guy didn't have enough wall textures for you and it made you get lost? I know it's kind of a dickish thing to say here. Did you ever try just paying attention to the game, checking your minimap, turning on gore permanence in the settings, and navigating by viscera? These are issues that are easily circumvented by simply taking an active part in the game, being persistent and thorough. Look, maybe I'm just autistic and my brain was hanging on to the little details, but I found it very helpful to just kind of make a mental map as I traveled based off of landmarks such as tables, corners, doors, barrels, etc. I agree the environments all look very similar, but the dev worked around that by not using the same map type twice. Hi there, future Nickle here again. So, I bring this up because I don't go over this, but I bring this up not to do like whataboutism, like, hey there, well, this stuff isn't so good either, and like try and drag down the older classics in favor of my new thing that I just kind of like. Rather, I'm trying to bring forward the the absurdity of the criticism by pointing out the fact that, well, if you're gonna criticize it here in this new thing, are you also willing to criticize it here in these old things? Because to me, it's a stupid criticism to levy. It's something you can easily work around. It doesn't lead to your death unless you suck at games, and in general, it's an easier, not easier. This isn't scripted, this is just me correcting the mistakes of the past. It's a nothing criticism, to say that, oh, well, it's all just the same wall textures. Like, okay, well, everyone likes to criticize the games of the early 2000s for all being, brown and olive and all those colors. Fallout 3 is all green. Quake, the original Quake, is just mostly brown. And this is kind of why I bring this up, is I'm not trying to say these games suck, but rather I'm trying to say, okay, well, if these games were good, and these games also had this, then why is this game bad because of this thing that these good games also have? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to do whataboutism, and I'm not trying to say that the older games are bad for it. Again, to me, this is a stupid criticism to levy, but I feel that it would be fair to address it, and so I'm trying to address it in as logically a way as I can. We'll see how I chop this up in editing. To further beat a already dead horse. Basically, having something be aesthetically... not aesthetically. But having, basically the same wall textures over and over and over again if you're gonna say it's bad, you have to say it's bad every time it shows up. It has to be bad in Wolfenstein. It has to be bad in, Ivan Zianovsky's fucking hackware that hijacks your graphics card to mine Bitcoin. And you have to say it's bad in the Citadel. I don't think that it's a bad thing, so I wouldn't say that. But these people that do say it, I'm saying, okay, well, you have to levy that criticism evenly. You can't just do it to this one game because you didn't play this game when you were like 8 years old and first learning what a video game even is. Speaking of maps and levels, the Citadel boasts a roster of 35 levels for the player to explore. 7 of them are boss fights, so that's pretty much corridor, arena. Of the 28 remaining maps, only about 8 of them railroad the player to a single line of approach. The rest are just wide open maps that serve to encourage the player to explore for secrets, alternate paths, and lock bypasses. Personally, my favorite tactic would be to find the highest point on the map, JFK the more spongy enemies, and then kill everything else I could see. This is my idea of fun. But the open nature of the levels gives players the freedom to approach the level in near any way they want. As an extension of that, sometimes the environment can be dynamically revised. However, it doesn't seem like this was completely fleshed out. Certain bits of environment are reliably destructible, while others are only destructible in certain contexts that I have yet to understand. Now, the Citadel has 6 secret levels, at least 2 of which pay homage to Doom and Wolfenstein. I found that to be a nice touch. Weapon design is sufficiently believable with a sci-fi aesthetic, and based on the animations, seem to function in fairly realistic ways. You wouldn't notice it based off the appearance, but the Citadel is a rather resource-intensive game as far as visuals. Enemies and environments jib and explode into so many different ways that massacring a group of more than 5 NPCs at once will probably make your machine turn into a PowerPoint. This was far more of an issue when the game first launched, however, it has been undergoing updates since then to overcome and optimize such issues. For context, the first update was August 12th of 2020, and the most recent was now February 22nd, 2022. All in all, the technical issues of the game have been so thoroughly resolved that the most recent update was just a fix for HUD flickering during weapon swaps. Back to the messy bits, the reason giving enemies is so hard on systems is because most every internal organ of the NPCs has been drawn in. I can blow some androgynous anime cyborg's head off and spend the next minute tracking down every fleck of gray matter that was just violently expelled from their skull. Again, this is fun to me. Between some tangents in earlier sections and the background gameplay, you've probably already got a rough idea of how movement works in the Citadel, so this section should be relatively quick. Movement is pretty standard for an FPS revival game: sprint, crouch, double jump, wall mantling, and bullet time. The only thing it seems to be lacking is a dash and a slide. Some rather unique additions are the player's ability to lean around corners, however, making firing from cover easier and breaking some engagements. Movement freedom, when paired with versatility, facilitates the earlier mentioned player ability to approach most levels in any way they see fit, not forcing them into a singular tactic. Now, in the Citadel, there is a light resource management system, as there would be in any FPS game. That being said, however, the Citadel seems to pair more traditional FPS resources in with light survival mechanics and even arcadey elements. So let's explore that. Standard fare-wise, you kind of have health, stamina, armor, and ammunition. They all function pretty much as you'd expect, barring the need to manually administer health and stamina, or oxygen, and oxygen's allowing the player to enter bullet time. The ammunition is readily available with varying commonality through most levels. Rifle, shotgun, pistol, LMG, and SMG rounds are practically everywhere. Grenades tend to lurk in room corners or in the leftovers of danger Jawas. Snipers, rockets, and satchel charges really only show up in levels where the game decides that you're going to need them, so it's wise not to run around just nuking infantry with a Panzerfaust. Finally, energy cells, airstrikes, and special ammunition can only really be purchased from the merchant, found in secrets in levels and during intermissions. In the survival corner of things, we have hunger and weapon decay. Food needs to be administered systematically to avoid stamina and health debuffs, as well as eventual death. Hunger, however, was such a minor mechanic, I never actually ran out of food or died of hunger in my 5 playthroughs of the game. Weapon condition can be toggled off, however, I found it added an extra layer of depth and challenge to the game. The longer you use a gun, the more likely it becomes to randomly jam during operation, eventually becoming unusable if not replaced in time. I found it to be a much better way of encouraging players to use all their weapons rather than, say, I don't know, only giving them a maximum of 24 shotgun shells. Doom Eternal. Finally, we come to the arcade elements of gameplay. Now, on a skin-deep level, you just look at the bosses, right, and you see they function much like a bullet hell fight. Getting more into actual gameplay and player interaction, however, there's an in-game currency, no, not real money, and a live system. Scattered throughout the levels and in the messy leftovers of dead enemies are silver and gold tokens. These can be spent at the in-game shop for armor, resources, ammo, weapons, and attachments, or at health, oxygen, and food vending machines throughout the level. Now, lives and respawns in the Citadel is a little weird. When you're playing, if you die, the game sends you back to the start of the level, even if you have extra lives, unless you found and activated the pattern buffer. The pattern buffer serves as a sort of checkpoint hidden in each level. But, when activated, the player will automatically respawn at it upon death until they run out of lives, without the game resetting the player's progress through the level. If that makes any sense. Okay, big honesty time. I mean, I was being honest before. This is just behind the scenes honesty. This video has been in production for like 6 months, longer if you count some of my lower effort earlier attempts. A big part of long production time is there's a lot to this game. 3 weeks ago, I was taking a break from rewrites to gather some B-roll from the game, and I unlocked this. This was during my 4th playthrough. I have no idea what, if anything, I did differently, and I could find no references to this gun on Steam whatsoever. Point of this digression is this. I don't know all there is to know about the Citadel. I probably never will, because I don't even know what I don't know.
There are known knowns and that there are known unknowns, but there's also unknown unknowns. Things we don't know that we don't know.
So please, bear that in mind when you buy this game, beat it on its hardest difficulty in 3 hours, and snidely nitpick my video in the comments. Now, on to the rest. The Citadel has a lot of guns, each with a secondary and alternate fire, as well as some attachments and special ammunitions in the shop. Now, I could go through this, each weapon one at a time in detail, outlining their strengths and weaknesses and whether or not I like their attachments and what kind of utility they have. In fact, I did that in an earlier draft. It was long, it was dull, my writing suffered, I repeated myself several times, it was dull, and I'm pretty sure I went a little insane by the end of it. So instead, we're going to lightning round the arsenal. Ready? Me neither. Let's go! And now, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from the far east of the Pacific Ocean, the island chain of Japan, please give a warm welcome to the Citadel Arsenal! So first up, we have our starter, the Forgiver. It has a normal side-to-side swing and an up and down power swing, and it can be upgraded to swing faster. The Meta Magnum fires pistol rounds, functionally semi-automatic. You can also jam a grenade into the barrel some fucking how without becoming Prego, and use it as a grenade launcher. Can be upgraded with more ammo capacity and a 2-round burst. The Assault Rifle shoots 3 bullets at mid-speed at mid-range with mid-recoil, zoom, and spread. Also has a fuck you eye wind laser, which reliably kills most all enemies and breaks the game. Great sniper substitute in a pinch. Upgrade with a red dot and 3-round burst. Blunderbuss. You played OG Doom? Remember the shotgun? Yeah, it's that, with an explosive shell alt-fire. Upgraded for longer range. Machine gun. Cut enemies in half with bullets. If for some reason you were trying to have any semblance of accuracy while firing, alt-fire shoots slower. Barely. Also comes with portable war crimes. Upgrade for higher ammo capacity. The SMG shoots tiny bullets fast, can be dual-wielded. OD oxygen for instant Hong Kong classic. Rocket launcher, single-use Panzerfaust knockoff, I guess. This one ain't very cool yet. Whale gun, sniper rifle for turning the heads of faraway enemies into a fine pink mist. Upgrade for a bigger scope, also can fire armor-piercing rounds. Very useful. Satchel charges, deletes walls, buildings, tanks, mechs, administered to anything not solvable with the assault rifle. If problem persists, you didn't use enough. Laser designator, because fuck you and everything within 15 meters of you. Quad launcher, because Commando is a cool-ass movie, and if you disagree, you probably don't know what the inside of a woman feels like. Can be upgraded with better scope and airburst warheads. Hand grenades. They work like all hand grenades. Throw them away and blow stuff up. Hold on to them for a bit to blow stuff up faster, or just use as many as you can and carpet bomb the desired room. Shock cannon. Cooler version of the blunderbuss. Semi-automatic, higher effective range, shoots zappy balls and explosives as well. Zeus cannon. Portable X-ray machine for most enemies. Ammo available exclusively in the shop. The Redeemer. I have no idea what the fuck this thing does, but it doesn't look or sound pleasant. It also kills stuff good. Now, earlier I mentioned danger javelins. This is a subtle nod to the fact that I forgot I hadn't gone over the enemies yet in the script. The Citadel has almost as many enemies as it does guns, not including bombs. You have Tech Priests, Danger Jawas, Emo General Grievous, SS Security, Auto Turrets, Fat Drones, Tall Drones, OSHA-compliant war crimes, Wizard, Slimes, Mechs, Light Tanks, Medium Tanks, and Heavy Tanks. The wide variety of enemies paired with the game's implementation of them are what gives the game its difficulty. We haven't talked about it much because it's really not that important. All that being said, I'll only be touching on the basic infantry. If you want a comprehensive enemy review, go spam requests for this game in CV11's comments section. First up, we have Tech Priests, so named for their red robes and cybernetics. They mill about throughout most maps, throwing these little hammer things at you. They can be one shot with most weapons, requiring no more than 3 shots from pistols and assault rifles. They mainly exist just to harass the player and keep you from zooming in for too long without clearing an area. They're not much of a threat unless you underestimate them. They will fuck you up if you don't treat them with passing respect. Danger Jawas. They wear brown robes, throw grenades, and explode when killed. I'd love to make a different joke, but people tend to frown on that sort of thing. Not really much else to say. Their grenades are only a threat if you lack awareness of your surroundings. If you get in too close, they will suicide bomb you. You can shoot off their torso and use their legs as a redneck red barrel. Emo General Grievous. He's by far the most common and dangerous enemy on the basic roster. Armed with the assault rifle and a bad attitude, he will try to fuck up your whole week from the other side of the map if he has a shot. Sustained fire can be harmful, and more than one tends to necessitate explosives or abnormally high amounts of oxygen. Occasionally, you will find 1 or 2 dug into machine gunners' nests with the LMG, ready to make Swiss cheese out of your tender, unaugmented anime ass. Finally, we come to the last of the standard infantry, SS Security. They're relatively rare depending on the level, but the dev definitely knows how to use them. They carry shotguns and are waiting for you around every corner and in every tight space. Let one get the first shot at close range, dead. Encounter more than 3 at a time in a tight space, dead. Get taken by surprise, you guessed it, dead. You learn hard and fast to listen for these wolfpack bastards and to always shoot first. Now, I did some research regarding the game prior to creating this video, and the most coverage I could find on it was this article by Niche Gamer called Do Kuromori Interview, The Citadel, Harassment, and How to Make Your Voice Heard in Japan. In it, the developer, Do Kuromori, repeatedly reiterates that he's not a Guro or gore artist, and his game is not fetishistic in any way. This is due to the fact that there was a minor Twitter mob calling for blood when the game first released due to the heavy detail in the GIFs. It's not important. What I want to talk about is some of the other cool stuff in the article, and I'll link the full article in the description for those of you who are interested. In the article, Do Kuromori talks a bit about some of the inspirations for the world setting. Now, personally, I've always been drawn to the worlds and backstories of fiction and games, so I was admittedly a little disappointed by how little story there was in the Citadel. That's not to say that's a bad thing. The story, inasmuch as we see in the Citadel, is sufficient for the player to have a rough understanding of what's happening and what they need to do. I didn't feel lost story-wise until the very end, and I believe that that was intended. However, I really enjoyed the extra insight the interview provided for more of the background and setting of the world of the Citadel. Do Kuromori cites such creative influences as Blame and Meta Barons, as well as attributing the red and green color scheme being inspired by 1986's Relics. The characters are all based on original drawings done by Do Kuromori some years ago, and he describes the protagonist as of a strong and silent atmosphere, and even admits that she wears a strangely revealing costume. You can't see right now because I'm not brave enough to show it on YouTube, but below the ribcage, the martyr is only wearing thigh-high boots and a vertical belt, which I am confident in saying YouTube, it probably would take a dim view to me sharing with you. But yeah. Jokes aside, he does attribute the above characteristics to such inspirations as Tarna from Heavy Metal and Aeon from Aeon Flux, even describing the game's storyline as similar to Tarna's and the storyline of Bungie's Pathway into Darkness. Furthermore, in world inspirations, he does seem to take a lot from H.G. Wells' Time Machine, but kind of spicing it up with a more cyberpunk grimdark style to it. Now, originally, I was going to go over a portion of the interview here and kind of talk about it and go through it beat by beat, but as I was recording that in an earlier take, I kind of didn't like the way it came out. It felt like I was just reading the interview to you guys, and since I've already got that linked in the description, I figure that wouldn't be honest of me to do, you know? So I'll link it there. If you guys want to hear more about kind of the story and how things are, it's in there, but none of it really has important effects on gameplay or, you know, really the game in general. It's all just background author information, pretty much. Well, that's about all I had to say. If you couldn't tell, I really enjoyed the Citadel. I think it's an excellent game, politely paying homage to its mother genre while adding in a bit of its own style. Sure, it's not perfect, it's got its issues with audio and, you know, alert sounds and even a few visual hiccups. But when compared to its pros, I can confidently say the game is worth the buy. In an industry that's already super saturated with business majors, E3 award bait, and general shovelware, the Citadel stands out as an incredible realization of what indie games should be. Just a single man's artistic vision, if you will. So go out and buy it. It's only $15, and if that's too rich for your taste, put it on your wish list and wait for a sale. Because the Citadel is everything modern games have forgotten.